Hey everyone, thanks for joining us. I'm Jared. I'm head of marketing here at Hypertrack, and I have the pleasure of introducing Mike Shebat, CEO of Traba, who will lead us in a session building a culture for hypergrowth. Mike Shebat is the co-founder and CEO of Traba, a labor platform for light industrial that leverages data and AI to find the best workers for their customers. In the past 4 years, he has scaled the business from having to drive the first workers to their jobs himself in Miami, all the way to hundreds of thousands of workers across 27 states. So, what a growth story there. Prior to founding Traba, Mike worked at McMaster-Carr, where he saw the difficulties of working with staffing agencies firsthand. Then he worked for Uber 5 years, launching UberEats in new markets, getting hands-on experience with building the playbook for amazing marketplace launches. So with that, again, thanks everyone for joining, and I'll go ahead and pass it to you, Mike.
Awesome. Thanks so much for the introduction, Jared, and thanks to Hypertrack for hosting today. As Jared mentioned, I'm here to talk about building a culture for hypergrowth. And before I get into it, wanted to actually define what culture actually is. So culture is what takes place on a day-to-day basis in your company. It's the reality of what happens on the ground. And strong cultures are the intersection of these three key components. The first is that you want it to match your company's vision and where you're headed. The second, is it authentic to all the individuals that work at your organization? And then the third, is it aligned with producing great value to your specific customers? So when you're starting a company, I think it's best to define your culture from the beginning. It's usually probably just yourself and your co-founder, if you have a co-founder, and going back to what do you actually want to do? What kind of company do you want to build? And when you work backwards from that, it really helps guide what the culture wants to look like. I know we're talking about hypergrowth today, but not every business has to be a hypergrowth company, and those cultures are going to look very different. So some businesses are lifestyle businesses, maybe they're family-run companies that want to produce more of a cash flow. Other businesses might be backed by private equity or venture capital. And since we're talking about hypergrowth companies, we're going to talk about those cultures, and those by nature, obviously the goals are very large. And as mentioned at the top, Traba, our goal is to transform the light industrial staffing industry with great technology. We are a venture capital backed company backed by Founders Fund, Coastal Ventures, and General Catalyst. So we took VC financing because that type of financing is tailor-made for hypergrowth companies. And part of being a hypergrowth company, we're pretty unapologetic of dreaming very big. We want to create a company that has over $1 trillion in enterprise value and really build a business that leaves a legacy behind us, one that's bigger than Amazon or Apple. And our mission is to build a world where the global supply chain operates at peak efficiency, which is actually a lot bigger once you actually dominate the wedge of traditional temp staffing. You can actually start to produce a lot more products for your customers and really create a lot of great impact for individuals all around the world while also making sure the supply chain operates at peak efficiency. So with that goal in mind, we have set the culture at the company that can really support this outcome for the organization. Because as a reminder, as everyone knows, venture capital backed companies, you have crazy high targets where you have to hit like numbers every single month with not a lot of resources and not a lot of time. So with that, that's our company vision. And then the second part is what's authentic to the team. And when you first start the company, you and your co-founder, if you have any of your early team, like what is authentic to you as individuals, it probably correlates to what you're going to build together with the company vision. But at Traba, my co-founder and I, Akshay, we got together and we're like, what kind of people are we? How do we actually live our daily lives and what do we value? And it really came down into these four key components. And we have posters all around the office. We have this on our job boards because you really want people to opt into the authentic culture of who we are and where we're going. So as I mentioned a few slides ago, dreaming big is one of our values. Building $1 million business is very different than building $1 billion business, and building $1 billion business is obviously very different than building $1 trillion business. But when you say something like this, where it's crazy to say you're going to build something that is going to be like bigger than Apple or Microsoft, but you got to back it up with hard work. So I see this as like a similar situation as a young athlete that has a very strong goal to go to the Olympics, for example. And they not only want to just go to the Olympics and compete, but they want to win that gold medal. They want to beat a world record and be the fastest, maybe in a race ever to exist. And it's similar with raising venture capital financing and going public. Like you don't just want to have a binary outcome of going public. You want to continue to grow and continue to build a huge company. So with that, obviously Olympians' work ethic really represents these athletes. They wake up at the crack of dawn, they go to practice, they're managing their diets accordingly. It's very clear that athletes like Michael Phelps, like their whole life is organized around becoming the best swimmer on the planet. So we have that same mentality here at Traba, where every single person it's a team sport to build a company, unlike swimming. It's more like volleyball or basketball, where you're all together trying to build something crazy and trying to defy all odds to make something work. And in addition to that, our customers also work very hard. Like one of the biggest, our customers really value work ethic as well, and in terms of us providing great workers to them that have that work ethic. The next Traba value is growth mindset because you can dream big, you can work hard, but if the company really is inflecting and growing really quickly, then every single person at your organization is going to have to essentially evolve and reinvent themselves as their roles continue to compound at the slope of the company. So we love to hire people and really live and breathe the growth mindset. Like, for example, my job as a founder has definitely evolved since the early days of driving workers to shifts, having roundtables where every single one of our workers at Traba could meet for like a pizza lunch and talk about their experience on the platform, to having a lot more. So this is able to really happen through giving, seeking, and acting on feedback throughout time. And then the last Traba value is customer obsession. So everything we do, we're trying to completely revolutionize the supply chain. And the only way we can really do that is really do right by the customer, get involved and really learn their pain points and try to build for them, which with that's a great segue into the third component of culture, which is making sure that the culture, if it's a strong one, is very much aligned with producing something of great value to the customer. So as a leader of your organization, one of the components that I think you have the most day-to-day influence on is what is authentic to the team, because the team you build is the company you build. So we'll get into that. So we're going to start with how to hire for your culture. So first of all, like assuming that you, your co-founder, your early team really thought about what is authentic to the group, how does that correlate to the vision and where you're heading, and also the customers. You want to actually be unapologetic and loud about your culture. It's something that there's nothing wrong with it. There's a lot of different types of cultures. And the best thing you can do is find where you diverge from the middle of the bell curve or most companies to get your name out there. So be vocal about this on social media, be unapologetic about it. And it works like marketing, where say you want to market to a certain type of customer, it's far better to drive inbounds from the customers that will be good customers for your product. The same thing with employees. So if you are a hypergrowth company, you probably don't want to talk about if you don't really care that much about work-life balance in the early days of building a hypergrowth company, you don't want to lean into that. You want to actually lean away from that. So the more binary you can be and the more divergent, the better people can get signal and you can cut through the clutter. So this will drive inbound to your company. So that's the top of the funnel. And then when you actually are building an interview process, every single final round interview, I interview every single person that joins the organization. That accomplishes a few things. One is every single person that interviews people before will know that, okay, the CEO is going to end up doing the final round. So you actually save your organization a lot of time because they'll essentially cut out the people that probably won't be a good fit earlier in the process. And then the second is you can really dive deep. And one, you can remind the candidate, like you almost want to re-emphasize so much, okay, here at Traba, we work from 8:30 in the morning. We're all here ready to go to late into the night. We're having dinner together either at the office. This is our number one thing. And you really want to look into the candidate's eyes and just see, do they have that spark of excitement or are they almost looking away and feeling, okay, this might not be the right fit. You want to just be like, you almost want to, we call this anti-selling. You want to anti-sell the candidate during the interview process so they know all the goods and bads of your organization. And knowing all that, they still want to opt in. They're going to be a far better culture fit. So reinforce the realities of your business. And then also every CEO or whoever's interviewing the person, you want to ask like questions that someone can't necessarily prepare for by everyone's using ChatGPT. What's the best answer to this question? Or how do I talk about a weakness? You want to ask things that probably haven't been asked before that will lead to a drastically different response that the candidate has to think on their toes. And it should be correlated to making sure that person is a good fit for your culture. Okay, so now assuming that you were loud at the top of the funnel, you had some great interviews, you gave some offers, what happens when the people actually show up to your organization? So just most of the time, especially even if they're a college grad, but especially if they have a lot of experience at other organizations, they've essentially learned how to be a professional at all these other organizations. So if you can imagine someone coming from a company like Tesla, that's far different than someone coming from even the same industry group, someone coming from Ford or General Motors. So if they join your organization, that's an auto industry, but it's the same thing in tech or any other type of company. So you want to focus on really like rapid assimilation into your culture and the pace of your organization. And the number one way you can do that is making sure that you're really on top of delivering fast feedback to even things that don't might not make intuitive sense. It might not be necessarily wrong, but they're just different from how your organization acts. So give that feedback extremely quickly. So for example, at Traba, because one of our biggest value props to businesses is making sure that we can provide great workers to show up to their facilities on time or ahead of schedule, we really care about starting meetings right on the minute when it starts. So if someone walks in 5 minutes late to a meeting, that feedback will be given very quickly. And the reason why you want to explain the why is just like how I mentioned, like we do this because it's representative of our customers. Also, if someone's showing up late to meetings and that's the default for your company, you can imagine how this compounds with a hypergrowth company where you're hiring a lot of people, people are kind of learning from what's around them. If everyone's showing up late constantly, then it's just like very inefficient across the whole organization. So that's just one small example of something that we care about that you want to give the fast feedback on. And another thing is, like I mentioned, if you wait too long, you actually really do risk cultural drift because people in organizations are highly impressionable and they essentially will look for signal for those around them and act more like them. So if there's certain cultural flags that are way off, you want to flag these things very quickly. And a big reason for that is culture is like concrete. Like in the beginning, it's very malleable. You're setting it as an organization, but as you go through hypergrowth, these things just become the defaults and it becomes like very hard to change culture at scale. You essentially need just like concrete, like a jackhammer to really get into it and try to change it. But the good news is if you set culture correct and culture right, then it will compound and be like solidified for a very long time. And that's important. But another thing that to pay attention to as a leader is one thing that what we do is when we think about people that are actually achieving a lot of your organization and then they're going about it in the way that is culturally authentic and the to your organization is you want to incorporate not only what people have accomplished into performance reviews but also how they went about their job. Did they exemplify the core values? Like essentially what you want here is you want to be able to get up in front of your organization and say this individual, he or she is going to get promoted. Here's all this great work that they've done, and here's actually how they go about their job. And it's not only what you say, it's people will also see how these individuals behave, and then they're going to want to emulate them. Because everyone at your organization, like assuming they want to stay at your organization for a while, wants to move up and get more money, more responsibility. So if you're showing like these people that are getting more money and responsibility are acting like this, that will actually reinforce those impressionable defaults even further skewed in that direction. So basically, in summary, the blueprint for culture at a hypergrowth company or any company is if it's a strong culture, it should match these three things. The first, it should match where you want to go. What type of business do you want to run? There's no wrong way to do this. It just has to match authentically to that vision. It also has to match authentically to the team, starting with the founders, but then as you build out the team, who are the leaders at your organization? Who else are you hiring? And then is it aligned with driving value for your customers? Because that's really going to be the flywheel of what creates a hyper-growth, successful organization. So, like I mentioned, match the company vision, authentic people in the organization, and aligned with driving value. And with that, thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Mike. Really appreciate the discussion. One of the questions that popped in is how can you build for some of the subcultures that might occur within an organization? For instance, You have a development team that may operate differently than, say, a sales team, which may operate differently than like a customer success team. So how do you navigate those different subcultures within the organization?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. So we actually did also experience this here at Traba. So in the early days, for example, there's not many subcultures. It's usually a small group of people in one room. So you can set defaults that are pretty static. But then as you grow, like you mentioned, like engineers, they operate quite differently than maybe a customer success person that's going into the market constantly on call. The way we actually do this is you actually almost make the culture a lot, you start to make it more high level versus more prescriptive. So I mentioned a very prescriptive default because it does correlate with showing up on time with every single person in the organization. But when it comes to, for example, hours in the office or like working in the office, yeah, basically one of the main ones is hours in the office. It's different per team. You start to expand out and they're more of, okay, here's the high level how what we do, but we're not going to be as prescriptive. That's to each organizational lead.
Got it. Got it. Thanks for that. Another question is, how long do you give someone to adapt to company culture, and when do you let them go if they're not a fit?
So it depends on the actual scenario of the specific individual. I think the clock starts after you give the first bit of feedback. So that's why you want to give the feedback very early. If they are not taking action on the feedback at all, and maybe things are going really awry, then it's actually legitimately better for both the individual and the organization to move quickly because then the individual didn't alert everyone on LinkedIn they joined your job. They can still go look for a new job. And then it's better for your organization because they're not like so involved and embodied with everything that things are going to be hard. So if things are really bad, then of course you want to reflect on the interview process, like where did we go wrong here? How can we improve that to make sure that we don't make that mistake again? Because it is on the company as well. I don't have a specific amount of time, but I would say in the matter of weeks versus months. You do want to give people an opportunity, but there's a far different scenario if it's like a problem in terms of like their actual behaviors and cultural attitude versus like outputs and outcomes. Like you want to coach some of that and see what someone can actually change.
Got it. So it's about identifying those misalignments as early as possible and course correcting accordingly. Another question we have here is, what is the biggest cultural belief that you had and then changed your mind about?
So I actually have been pretty consistent on cultural beliefs because it is very authentic to us. It's more about how they actually get implemented. I will say that the main one is probably static hours in the office. I still believe that an in-person company with a lot of hours, and actually one way I think about it that is a little bit different than most people, is I believe that there's a reasonable amount of time that you can put as involved as inputs into the organization. And then you want to basically, like for example, let's just say 60 hours a week at a hypergrowth company. 60 hours a week is like a fair amount of inputs to think about, okay, this is how much I'm going to be working. Then it's thinking about how much leverage can I actually get on that denominator of time. Because like otherwise you almost always have this organization where you're having to give work to somebody, wait for that work to come back, give more work, wait for that work to come back. When a far better experience both for the employee and the manager is to have someone like proactively think about, okay, here's what else I can do to drive outputs going for like more outputs for the organization and more outputs, not only in my specific role, but maybe in the roles around my role. And the one way to do that is if someone is, okay, I'm at an early stage startup, I'm at a hypergrowth company. What else can I take on given this default of time that all of us at the organization are committed to? But so that's like a belief that I have that I am still consistent on. But in terms of like how much of that is in the office or how that kind of averages out over time, I would say like I've changed my mind on that a bit as we've scaled up.
Got it. Very interesting. So there's definitely some adjustment pertaining to the conditions, if you will. And along those lines, there's another question here. How do you adjust your hyper growth plans when macroeconomic factors like the economy and the political environment impact business unexpectedly?
Yeah, it's a good question. So not only are we thinking about macro issues, but you're right, even on a micro level, maybe customers are behaving a little bit differently than you originally thought. Maybe you actually were once going after a certain subsegment of like what you're chasing after and you want to deviate that. So there's always this notion of you have a hypothesis of where you think you're going to go, and then you're essentially gathering data points as you build your company that either invalidate or validate that hypothesis. The way that I think about it when it comes to more macro level things is in the early days, you don't actually have a lot of data points yet. Like when you start a company from scratch, you don't have data for your organization of quota attainment or customer behavior. So what you do is actually, or what I did and what I continue to do is what is like a very good company in terms of hyper growth today? Like what would be like if a venture capitalist, for example, were to be like, here's the best companies in my portfolio. How does the intersection between the amount of revenue that that's coming into your organization, what the unit economics look like, customer behaviors, what does that tend to look like? And then you can essentially say, here's what we want to accomplish in terms of the end results. How are we going to get there together given this macro environment? So if there's obviously working in industrials, there is a lot of volatility with tariffs and volatility could be good or bad. In staffing, actually, some components of it is quite good if there's volatility because then the customer doesn't actually know how many full-time workers they need at a given moment, so they rely more on shift work or gig work or temp work. Yeah, so like basically it's like then like you do the thought exercise of you still want to accomplish this great stuff. How are you going to modify to try to get there?
Excellent. So there's one more. This actually isn't a question, it's a shout out here. Someone is commenting, giving you a compliment on your great interview with TBPN last week.
Oh,
Um,
great.
so that's cool that someone saw that. I guess I have to check that out. And then I think there's one other question. How do you nurture culture long term as the company grows?
Yeah, so culture is very much like the team you build as the company you build. So the way I nurture it as the company grows is I promote very quickly the people that are behaving in ways and doing certain things at the organization that I would like to have a lot of people do. Because essentially, when you first start the company, maybe there's a few people in the room. It really is the founders that are setting it. But then as time goes on, you're not in every room. So the people that are in the room, you want the people that are driving the right behaviors for your culture to be like the most like publicly important in the room. So the way I drive it as we scale is just promote very quickly the right people that are embodying the right behaviors. And obviously we believe that because this is correlated to driving value to customers, the right people with the right behaviors should by very nature be getting the best results. Otherwise, maybe there's something off with the culture.
Got it. Yeah, totally makes sense. And another compliment here is that this is super helpful and tactical. They thank you for the information and the perspective that you're delivering today. And I reflect that sentiment as well. So definitely appreciate that. And the last question here is, are your customers creating internal worker pools that are flex work? And how do you see that trend versus increase in shift work?
That's a good question. So actually, when I first started the company, given my experience at Uber, I actually, speaking of a hypothesis that was invalidated or validated, I had a theory that most of the industrial landscape would be more in a gig work type of environment because that's similar to the careers at Uber and somewhat similar to my personal experience at McMaster-Carr. It was more like really last minute when we needed our temp workers. But one thing that I've learned as we've scaled the company is the businesses that are most close fits to Traba now usually want workers for a little bit longer period of time. Like they essentially need workers for more of a season, or they want workers to be a temp worker with them for it's part of their entire workflow throughout the year. So when it comes to like shift work or gig work versus more a little bit more like middle term temp work, we're seeing like more of a trend towards temp work in at least our business and like what we are focusing on.
Good to see that the culture of consistency is not only internal, but in the offices of your and workspaces and in warehouses of your customers. Great to see that kind of ripple effect that you're enabling. And That's it for the questions. So we're going to wrap up this session at this point. But once again, Mike, thanks for your time and this insightful discussion. I'm sure it's very helpful to the audience, and I really appreciate how Traba is an example in the industry. Thanks again for your time.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
For sure. Take care.